And we are live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Unfiltered Report. My name is Ryan. What a day. Here we are. Wow. What a Saturday we had. Day three of the World Cup in the books. Day two in Omaha for the College World Series in the books. Another great day in Major League Baseball. And the NBA Finals have come and gone. A huge congratulations to the New York Knicks. They got it done. They went in five in San Antonio earlier. I guess depending on how you want to look at it here, it's another one of these twilight hour recordings here. So depending on if you want to say last night or earlier tonight, depending on how you want to look at it. But look, congratulations to the Knicks. They went in, only lost one game since April 23rd, which was game three of the finals. They had a remarkable run in the playoffs. Everything clicked for them at the perfect time. Um, you know, the- it's a new era in the NBA. It's one of those things we've been trying to bang the drum on for a long time, and as much as look, I will always be happy to admit when I'm wrong, and I think we always have to say two things can be true at once. Did I have the Knicks winning the series? No, I did not. I had the Spurs in seven. I'm happy to be wrong on that. And this is a great example of in the sense I know we've given the Knicks propaganda a little bit of a ribbing in certain senses, but you know what? All the credit in the world to the Knicks. Um, I think it's a perfect example of what a difference a year can make. What a difference a coaching staff overhaul in that sense can make. I'll be the first to admit. Again, in that two things can be true at once. I will happily admit. Last year when the Knicks fired Tom Thibodeau, I thought was a brilliant decision. I think sometimes in sports, and I never root for people to get fired, obviously in any profession. Um, but I've always been a believer that coaching makes a huge difference, and regardless of the sport, and it makes such a big impact on any organization, regardless of the level. And there are certain coaches, regardless of the sport, that are great coaches, and Thibodeau's a fine coach, and but there are certain coaches that maybe regardless of the sport, we could do a deep dive on this in the future. I always go back to like Bo Pelini at Nebraska back in the day, for example. Like there are certain coaches that they're going to consistently get you to a certain place, but they might not get you over the hump. And I felt like with Thibodeau and his style, especially with this Knicks group that they had, which is a very similar core this year to what they had last year. Um, a lot of the critiques on Tom Thibodeau over the years have been, hey, he doesn't really utilize his bench as much. There's not really that much offensive creativity involved. There's a limited ceiling to what they do. The floor is always going to be really high, and with Tom Thibodeau is a great example. You're going to have a high floor. You're always going to be competitive. You're always going to be in games, but when you make a move like that, it's always a gamble because and it doesn't always pan off. There's so many, and that's part of the deep dive we can do in the future, regardless of the sport. Is there are always examples where um, there are these types of coaches that are again fine coaches. They're not. It's not like they suck or anything, but there might be a cap to how far they can take that particular team. But when you make a move like that, it is a bit of a gamble because you're never guaranteed to have the same level of success. So you're firing a coach like that, hoping to get over the hump. But for as many times as teams and organizations try to get over that hump. Sometimes when they, again, going back to Nebraska is a perfect example. Nebraska, long before I was ever put onto this earth, was one of the premier college football programs in the country. In my earlier years of life, they were maybe not as nationally dominant, but they were nationally relevant. They were a consistent, 9-win team every year, at least. And then they got rid of him trying to get over the hump, and they've been relatively irrelevant in terms of, obviously, success since then. So it doesn't always pan out. That's not the best example that I could give, but it's the one that comes to mind right now. There are so many more over the years. I mean, again, you go back to the Warriors. Mark Jackson's a great example. Mark Jackson did a fine job with the Warriors for many years. Some organizations would have kept him around and would have just dragged it on and given him the benefit of the doubt, but they made a tough decision and they let him go and they brought in Steve Kerr, and that unlocked the Warriors run that they had for so many years. Um, so there are a lot of examples of this throughout sports, whether it's college sports, professional sports, where, sometimes it does pan out, sometimes it doesn't. And in the Knicks case, when it happened last year that they decided to move on from Tom Thibodeau, I thought it was a great decision. But again, I'll make the caveat going back to my original point. I wasn't sure at the time if Mike Brown was going to be the right hire. I have always stood by the fact that Mike Brown, by all accounts and purposes, seems like a great dude. I've never had anything against the dude personally. I as a young, when I was in middle school way back when, Mike Brown coached the Lakers. I never really thought he did that great of a job with the Lakers. He didn't last very long. Obviously, before that he was with Cleveland with LeBron. And then ironically, we mentioned the Warriors. Spent many a years on Steve Kerr's staff. As one of their, if the lead guys on the bench, the associate head coach and whatnot. And when he got another chance with the Kings, coach of the year, in his first year with the Kings and the Beam team and all that. We'll do a deep dive with the Kings, especially now, the NBA finals have come and gone, which I would like to make mention before anything else that, of course, the season might be done, but as soon as one season ends, another begins. And here at the Unfiltered Report, basketball especially never stops. Especially now that the finals are done, we can finally get into that NBA draft combine recap. The draft is less than 10 days away. It's going to be not this Tuesday, but the Tuesday after. It's a 2-day event. They break it up now, first round and second round. Not the first time, obviously, that this is, but it's more of a recent thing in recent years. So they break it up into 2 separate days. That'll be a whole separate spiel for a different day. But, with this basketball never stops sort of deal, a lot of what we're going to continue to do is, we'll talk about the NBA draft before the draft and then after the draft. And with the draft, it'll give us an opportunity to deep dive all 30 teams throughout, the next couple of weeks, days, weeks, months, heading into the next season. And obviously the off season as well, free agency, the trade market, all these different deals. And part of the beautiful part about what I'm looking forward to with the season now being done and obviously basketball coverage not stopping is it allows us to finally, you know, throughout the course of the draft and the offseason, which is something that, in years past we haven't been able to really do on the record. It finally gives us the chance to be able to do that. And be able to give love to all these different processes of building a team, filling out a coaching staff. We'll go in, with all the teams that have either hired or yet to hire a new head coach, new front office, teams and players to look out for in the coming weeks, months, years to come. Some in the league, some again that'll get drafted in the next, week and a half or so. But just going back to the Knicks, when Mike Brown got hired by the Knicks, I wasn't sure how it was going to pan out. I was of the opinion when Mike Brown was the coach with the Kings, especially, I think it's always a perfect example. I think sometimes we do, again, not to contradict myself, but we do sometimes we don't give enough credit to coaches sometimes, and sometimes we give too much credit to coaches. And what I mean by that, especially at the head coaching level, is that a lot of times, the head coach gets a lot of the attention, a lot of the coverage, but there are so many, if you ever watch any game, obviously, if you watch a basketball game, if you spend any time watching the finals, they got a bajillion people on the bench. They got multiple rows of people, two rows, all these different people, uh, you know, all sorts of different roles. You have, the de facto offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators. You have have someone on the bench who does the challenges. You've got player development coaches. You have all these different people that come together and make up what you see on the court, but so much happens behind the scenes that doesn't get enough love and coverage sometimes. And when Mike Brown, for example, won Coach of the Year with the Kings, and they won the Beam, it was the Beam Team year. Um, one of the areas in which I felt that they had success was they had a really solid assistant coaching staff that year, and Jordy Fernandez was a big part of that, and that's a big reason why he got hired by the Brooklyn Nets. And I don't think it was any coincidence that the Kings maybe didn't have as much success once Jordy Fernandez left. I thought he was a big part of their success, not obviously entirely part of their success. And then obviously Sacramento's a disaster in and of itself, which we'll talk about the Kings and continue to deep dive it. And I hope, that the Kings can kind of rise from the ashes of mediocrity and, uh, you know, find a new era for them and some success because that's a passionate fan base over there in Sacramento. That place can get really loud when they're competitive, which is not far and few between in the last 2 decades or so. Really, again, only the Beam Team year that they made the playoffs. Other than the early years when I was younger, when they were competing with the Lakers in the early 2000s. It's been a long time for them, especially under current ownership with Vivek Reddidive. But I think going back again to this point that I'm trying to make is I felt that when Mike Brown came in, one of the things I thought that he did that I will give credit for is I think, obviously Jalen Brunson's father, Rick Brunson, is an assistant coach who was the lead assistant under Tom Thibodeau. And normally, when most coaches come in, they want to bring in their own coaching staff. That there aren't many. Maybe from time to time, you get a couple of holdovers from the previous staff, regardless of the sport. But what I liked was that they decided to keep him on board, but I wouldn't say they demote. I mean, they did demote him in a title sense, and they ended up hiring Chris Gent from the Hornets to be their associate head coach and be their offensive coordinator, if you will. Chris Gent won before they hired him about a month prior. Had won the NBA Summer League title with the Charlotte Hornets. Um, which we'll give a lot of love to summer league here in the next month or so. We got some special plans for that. Hopefully, knock on wood, regarding to our coverage of summer league. Summer league's one of my favorite times of the year. Honestly, I might even enjoy summer league. I enjoy summer league almost just as much, if not more, than things like the NBA playoffs. To be honest with you, which might be weird to some people, but can never get enough basketball regardless of the level. Also, again, not to keep tangenting, but one of the things I definitely love to do moving forward as well is give some love to high school recruiting as well and add that to the fold. And we keep talking about we'll do our college basketball transfer portal deep dive and we'll give a look ahead to maybe the upcoming freshman class in college basketball. Um, but when the Knicks hired Chris Gent to be their uh, offensive coordinator, they also hired Brendan O'Connor to be their defensive coordinator. They brought him over. from the Clippers. The Clippers have always been, in the last couple of years, a really solid defensive team. And so I felt, again, as much love as we're going to give to Mike Brown and we'll give to the players, because again, credit where it's due. I did agree with the decision to let go of Tom Thibodeau. I wasn't sure if Mike Brown was going to be the guy to do it, but here we are, and credit where it's due. Mike Brown and the New York Knicks. Mike Brown, the coaching staff, the players will never have to buy a drink or a meal in the city of New York, state of New York, really ever again. Especially in Manhattan, downtown New York, and all the different districts that they got going on out there. Um, but I just felt that, similar to the Beam Team year parallel that I'm trying to make and all these different things is I felt that they built a really good bench. Peter Patton's a guy, for example, even who's been a renowned shooting coach for many years. The Bulls brought him on a couple years ago and then fired him for whatever reason, which, we can get to the Bulls later too. It's no coincidence that the Bulls and the Kings and the Knicks kind of formed this trio that we've got going on here of comparing mediocrity and ass to a champion of the NBA as of, about, what was it, 8 hours ago, something like that. Um, but a lot of love to the Knicks. Going back to the Tom Thibodeau, Tom Thibodeau, Mike Brown situation with the Knicks. Um, the way that they tactically operated, they would have never been able to have operated like this under Tom Thibodeau in the playoffs, especially the way they were able to perform throughout the playoffs. Defensively, they were rock solid throughout the playoffs, but offensively, they unlocked the ceiling that they did not ever have under Tom Thibodeau, and they never would have had under Tom Thibodeau. So a lot of credit goes to the Knicks for making that move, taking the gamble that a lot of organizations would not make, and would continue to ride out the train of, hey, we're good enough, we're competitive, we're making it into the playoffs every year. That's good enough for us. I give a lot of credit where it's due. They said, no, we want to get over the hump. We want to win a championship. They had the core of players to do it, and this year proves that. They just needed the coaching staff to be able to bring that out of them, put them in the positions that they needed to be in order to succeed. And that's exactly what happened. So I give a lot of credit where it's due. Um, they went out there and they outcoached the hell out of the Spurs, especially. It's a learning experience for Mitch Johnson and his coaching staff that they have with the Spurs. Obviously, Popovich and those guys still loom very large in the shadows and have a big imprint. But Pop's not there on the bench on game day, and it might be their day to day. But I think it's a big learning experience for the Spurs as well. And we'll get to the Spurs in a second. But I just want to give a lot of love to the Knicks for making that decision, getting over the hump. I give a lot of credit to Finals MVP Jalen Brunson. This dude. I mean, not that it was really ever in doubt. I mean, regardless of how this series would have played out, I mean, he's one of the best players in the NBA. But for him to have that validation in the Villanova Knicks, obviously, I'm sure they wish that their boy Dante DiVincenzo would have been around to join them as well. But they don't have Carl Anthony Towns without Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle. Um, again, Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, you go down the list. Even the guys off the bench, we mentioned Tom Thibodeau, a guy like Landry Shamet would have never gotten the run that he got in the playoffs under Tom Thibodeau. Jordan Clarkson had a couple of good games. Deuce McBride's always been solid. Mitchell Robinson definitely is a free agent to watch when we get into our offseason deep dives and whatnot. And we'll see what happens there. But, to a man, the Knicks did everything that you could have possibly asked in a playoff run. Again, only losing 3 times the entire playoffs. They lost twice to the Hawks. Like we mentioned, they went down 2-1 to the Hawks. And once they went down to the Hawks 2-1, they lost 1 game the rest of the playoffs. And a lot of that was coaching adjustments that they made throughout not only the regular season, they trialed and error a lot of things. I remember earlier in the year Mike Brown was on record in one of his press conferences and basically said, like, hey, you know what? My assistant coaches had to basically come to me and be like, hey, maybe we should start Josh Hart. You could go back and find it. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said the same thing. And you know what? That's kind of my point where, as much love and credit as we'll give to Mike Brown, and I give credit where it's due, I think a lot of credit goes into the assistant coaching staff that him and the Knicks brought on around him. And I think that deserves to be spotlighted. I think again, going back to Chris Gent, I think this is a guy who very much could and should be an NBA head coach in very short order. Um, I always we always talk about it regardless of the sport. It drives me nuts when we get all these retreads. Um, maybe one of these days I'll drop my cancelable quote about retreads. But tonight will not be that night. We'll live to fight another day. Although who cares if we get canceled? To be honest, it doesn't fucking matter. But um, I just think that everything that the Knicks did in the last, not only in the last year, but this has been a long time in the making. This was a multi-year project. I mean, you go back again to the OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges trades. You had Josh Hart after they won the finals today, yelling "fuck them picks." And you know what? Sometimes, it goes to show you there are different ways to build a champion. Sometimes, last year OKC were built one way. They took their time, they built through the draft, they made their moves, and then with the Knicks, similarly, they took their time and built through the draft, but then, they flipped a lot of those young players. You go to the OG Anunoby trade. They don't get OG Anunoby. I know if you go back in the vault, a lot of people at the time will say, I know Armand's come on here and talked about it when the Knicks didn't get the number one overall pick and they dropped down to three. And instead of getting what Knicks fans would have wanted at the time and not getting Zion Williamson, they end up with RJ Barrett. Well, hey, you know what? You don't get OG Anunoby without RJ Barrett, without Emmanuel Quickly. You don't get Carl Anthony Towns without Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo. You don't get Mikal Bridges without building up the assets to have to be able to flip those picks in order to get him. And then obviously you don't win a championship without one of, if not the greatest free agent signing in the history of the sport, Jalen Brunson. Getting him not only to come from Dallas, but at the price point that he did. And then again, if we go back a year ago, Jalen Brunson taking a lot less money to extend, obviously still making a lot of money, but not a lot of players would have taken $100 million pay cut and what they could have made to what they did make. So I just give a ton of credit to the entire Knicks organization from top down bottom. In an era where, and in a world where, again, a lot of it's about, hunting the almighty dollar and, extrapolating every last cent and, retreads and being afraid of making tough decisions and all these different things. I give a lot of credit where it's due. They made again, this is not something that happened on a whim. This is not some Cinderella story. I mean, again, this is the New York freaking Knicks. I know they haven't won in 53 years. But this was a multi-year effort. Leon Rose, front office on down. This was not something that happened overnight. This was a carefully calculated plan that took years to come to fruition, but it finally did. And again, in a new era of the NBA, if I'm not mistaken, it's now 8 champions in 8 different years. We haven't had a back-to-back champ in quite some time since those Cavs Warriors series back in the day. And I couldn't be happier. If I could be able to tell that dude 10 years ago, in college or even in high school and middle school, and I could have told that guy, hey man, you just got to be patient. Like the thing that you've been preaching is coming. You just got to stick with it. And you're going to get that parity. The payoff is worth it. And, look, whether the Knicks win another championship or not, to me is irrelevant. They won it this year, and that's all that matters. They're forever immortalized. All those players and coaches and whatnot, front office on down. Regardless, I know sometimes there's this fetish for dynasties and superstars and all this crap, but at the end of the day, it's competition. It's not entertainment. If it happens to be entertaining, that's great. Um, and you couldn't get a more entertaining 5-game series than what we got in this NBA Finals. Definitely the most competitive 5-game series you'll ever watch, up until now. I mean, maybe not ever. I don't want to speak in hyperbole, but as far as the NBA Finals goes, about as competitive of a 5-game series as you'll get, definitely that I can recall in my lifetime. Um, but again, a lot of credit to the Knicks. Again, Jalen, going back to Jalen Brunson too. I mean, that dude's incredible. 45 points in the closeout game, took over in the fourth quarter. Missed the fourth quarter in many ways. Um, just an unbelievable ability to get to his spots. You know, not afraid to. I love players that aren't afraid to score the basketball and take, shoot 27 shots in a game. I always love those types of players. I know they get a bad rep, but for whatever reason, I'll never understand. Um, a guy like Jalen Brunson's a winner. He's a champion. Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby. You go down the list, these are winners. These are good basketball players. And most importantly, they fit together. And the coaching staff that they brought in were able to maximize the pieces that they had and get them over the hump. So I just have a ton of respect to what the Knicks have done this year. Uh, and to all the people that say the regular season doesn't matter, I call bullshit always. And this is a perfect example of that. A big reason being, I think the Knicks definitely trialed and errored a lot throughout the regular season. If you followed their journey throughout the regular season, they definitely, they tweaked a bunch of things throughout the year. Again, it goes without saying that they also won the NBA Cup too, which some people say doesn't matter. But look, credit to them. The first ever domestic double in NBA history, right there with the NBA Cup and the NBA Finals. Just an all around great season for the Knicks. And I think you just have to give credit where it's due. I tip my cap to them, and again to Jalen Brunson as well. Just the unique ability to get through his spots. He's never rushed. He gets whatever shot he wants whenever he wants it. Pound for pound. You know, and it doesn't matter how tall he is or whatever. I really couldn't give a stuff. He's an amazing basketball player. And when we talk about the NBA draft covers that we're gonna have, again, there's this fetish for superstars and there's fetish for like these top draft picks and whatnot. But a guy like Jalen Brunson, it was remarkable at the time, and it's even more remarkable now that a guy like that could go in the second round. Um, but it's not just him. They don't win that finals without all those players, without OG Anunoby, without Josh Hart, Mikal Bridges, Carl Anthony Towns, Landry Shamet. You go down the list. I mean, all these guys were incredible, and they all made an impact. Josh Hart to be, is one. I mean, that's the definition of a winning basketball player. He does all the little things that build. Every winning team needs a player like that. Someone who just gives you whatever the game needs. There are some games where he'll score more points, but he can score 5 points in the game and be the X factor on the floor every night. He's chipping in. He does all the dirty work. He plays great defense. Again, go just as far as pound for pound, size for size. He's one of the best rebounders in the league. He's been for quite some time. He's been one of my favorite players to watch for a long time. Josh Hart. It's just again. I mean, he plays with his heart on his sleeve. He dives for loose balls. He does all the little things that contribute to winning. He's a better passer than he gets credit for. Just a winning basketball player. OG Anunoby. I can't say enough good things about him. When he got drafted by the Raptors, we mentioned them last night. It was a slam dunk pick at the time. And I know it means a lot for OG because when the Raptors won the finals, he wasn't healthy that year. So I'm sure this one will mean exponentially more to him than the one in Toronto did because he actually got to play and contribute to it. I know Carl Anthony Towns did not have his best game today. He only had 2 points. He fouled out. He was in foul trouble all night. But they don't win the championship without Carl Anthony Towns and what he was able to do in the playoffs. The tactical adjustments that the Knicks coaching staff made throughout the year, finding ways to get Cap more involved. It was a trial and error. It wasn't always smooth. It wasn't always pretty. They had to. I'm sure again, a lot of things behind closed doors. I'm sure there were a lot of conversations, a lot of between Mike Brown and his coaching staff, between the players and the coaching staff, between the players amongst themselves, and all of that accumulates in the next first championship in 53 years. So a huge tip of the cap to them. I really, I can't emphasize that enough. And I'm just super, I'm already looking forward to the next season. Like I said, one season ends, and before it even ends, and as soon as it ends, already looking forward to the next one. Um, I can't wait for the draft coverage that we're going to have on here. Talk about all these prospects, not only before the draft, but, to me, I always like to say, once you get the full picture, who goes where, the picture gets so much clearer. And to finally be able to talk about that on the record after it happens is something that fills me with a lot of joy and with a lot of excitement. So I hope people out there will join us for that throughout the off season as well. And I mentioned summer league. Can't wait for that. We got some big things planned in store for that. And um, but I do want to talk about the Spurs side of things as well. We've given a lot of love to the Knicks, and we'll continue to do so. And I know the stars of the Unfiltered Report will join us in this conversation in the coming days and weeks and months. And we'll recap this NBA Finals, NBA playoffs, and we'll take a look ahead to the upcoming season. Um, so as I always like to say, just because you talk about something one time does not mean it's the only time you have to talk about it. You can always add to it, add more layers to it. Um, but on the Spurs side of things, we mentioned the coaching part of it. Again, I think it's a big you know learning lesson. I think for the Spurs young coaching staff. Mitch Johnson, young head coach, really again first playoff run for him, and a credit to the Spurs for making it this far, as a a younger team, and really making a run that they did. But I mean, I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that they're going to be kicking themselves all off season and for a long time. As much credit as I give to the Knicks for winning the NBA Finals and everything that I said, I stand by that. But I also stand by my pre-series prediction about taking the Spurs in seven. I don't regret that. Um, I do think it's healthier for the sport, in a parody sense. So I don't mind it, even though obviously, like I mentioned, it's not like the Knicks are some Cinderella story. It's the New York Knickerbockers. Yes, they haven't won in 53 years, but the amount of media you gotta get, the propaganda, off the charts, and I'm sure, we'll see with the buzz, all these, I think this upcoming season will be interesting to see how the Knicks build off of that. Obviously, I can't wait to see all that, and then the fan support. I'm sure the parade on Thursday is going to be electric. I'm sure. I mean, I'm sure they're still partying out there on the streets in New York. Right now it's probably 8 in the morning, but I'm sure that they haven't slept. In the city that never sleeps, as they say. I'm sure they haven't slept, but now on the Spurs side of things, yeah, I think they're going to be kicking themselves for a long time. I mean, I think that you're never guaranteed to find yourself back in that position. Obviously, I'm sure most people would project that they'll be around for a long time with the young talent that they have, and that they're not necessarily going anywhere. And I'll be the first to say that as well. But at the same time, regardless of anything, you never know how things are going to play out in the future. And they had an opportunity in 2026 to win an NBA championship. And in many ways, I think they were really the better team, maybe in some aspects. I mean, I know the Knicks were the better team and they won the series in that aspect. But, look, the Spurs, for them to blow the games in which they did, I'm not really one to normally say, these teams choked or whatever. I give as much on one side as it's the Spurs blew it. I think a lot of it's also that the Knicks took it from them, and the Knicks were they again, and going back to the fact that it's a new game too, not only in the parity department, but it's a new game in the sense that a lead is never as safe now as it used to be back in the day. Teams with the advancements of the game, and the talent of these players, no game is ever really fully out of reach. That game four comeback that the Knicks had would have never happened in a previous era of the NBA. Um, but in this new era that we've got going on, it's you see it all the time in a regular season. Throughout the playoffs, a 15-point lead can be cut down in a minute and a half. A 20-point lead, you can chip away, and continue to chip away, and with the 3-point shot, and just the pace of the game that's played nowadays, and the talent that these guys have. And that's where I think if you're the Spurs, you're going to be kicking themselves, because I think they had a double-digit lead in the first quarter in every game. They were in every game, and there wasn't a single blowout in this finals. They had the lead late in multiple games. Even tonight, the Knicks didn't take the lead until around the 5-minute mark in the fourth quarter. They only had one lead up until like the 5-minute mark of the fourth quarter. The Knicks were up 5-4, and then San Antonio led pretty much the entire game. But again, Jalen Brunson went on a massive run, um, by himself, damn near. They went on a big run, and all of a sudden they cut that lead down. And once the Knicks took the lead and went up by one, you kind of got the feeling that here we go again. It's the same script, and that's exactly what happened. The Knicks, it's a 4-quarter game, and again, going back to the Spurs coaching staff equation part of it, I think they're really going to have to make, they'll be kicking themselves throughout the offseason. I thought they were out coached throughout the series. I felt that every time that the Knicks made an adjustment, the Spurs were not able to adjust to that adjustment. I felt that the Spurs big flaws that they didn't anticipate. Even when you have a lead like that, you have to constantly be making adjustments. And I felt like it was the same script throughout the NBA Finals in the fourth quarter. They were not playing the same way that they were playing throughout the game. I think some of the rotational decisions and whatnot, we could Monday morning quarterback it as much as we want, but as much again going, sometimes we give too much credit to coaching, and sometimes we don't give enough credit to it. Sometimes we're too critical, and sometimes we're not critical enough. And I guess in this case, the truth is always, especially somewhere in the middle. But I just think that they left a lot to be desired. I think in many ways, at least one between, forget game one. Game one's its own can of worms, but game two, game four, and game five, the fact that they didn't win at least one of those games, they'll be kicking themselves all off season for that. Um, Again, as close and competitive of a 5-game series as you'll get. But I just feel that if you're San Antonio, there were a couple of things that they'll look back on and they'll regret. I think, what was successful for them in the first half throughout these 5 games, they went away from consistently in the second half. Um, Look, they're gonna get better. They're gonna, they'll add some pieces in the offseason, surely. Internal development will be a big theme. Um, I look, everybody's going to talk about Wemby in most circles, and there's not really much that I can say about Wemby that hasn't already been said. But what I do want to say, look, I can't say enough good things about Dylan Harper. I would have said it last year before the draft. I would have said it after the draft, throughout the season. I think that dude is an incredible basketball player. Like I said, I think any other team, if he wasn't on the Spurs, again, not to contradict myself because I think awards are pointless, but I think he would have been a rookie of the year. I think he's on that path of again, I never liked the superstar label bullshit, stuff, but look, he's a superstar, man. He'll be, we always talk about 1A, 1B sort of deal, and having multiple killers now in the game. And it's not just about having it's not like it used to be. We just have 1, 2, 3 good players. You need a whole team. But look, Dylan Harper's the kind of guy you could build a team around. He's the kind of guy, yeah, you put the ball in his hands and you see how far that guy can take you. Forget Victor Wembanyama, to be honest with you. Uh, you know, uh, that's separate. Regardless of anything with Wemby, let's not lose sight of the fact that this dude's fucking incredible. And on any other team, he's the foundational building block. I think on this team, he's the foundational building block. I think there's nothing that says you can't have two 1As. And as good as Wemby is, and as good as he can be in the future, I have no doubts that I think in many ways them losing. I'll be interested to see how they bounce back from this. I'm sure it'll motivate the hell out of them. But you know what? OKC's going to be pissed off and motivated too. A lot of these other teams in the West aren't going anywhere. If you thought the West was a bloodbath this season, it's only going to get more competitive. I can't wait for it. But again, going back to Dylan Harper, I thought what was really interesting to me actually was after the game, you had Devin Vassell in his post game press conference, which again, you normally don't get a lot of that of these press conferences, but every now and then you do. Devin Vassell did say that Dylan Harper was upset, throughout the season with his playing time and his role throughout the year, especially in the regular season. And he said, "quote I think we all knew he was talented. I don't know if anybody knew he was this talented besides himself. He was upset with playing time in different roles, and we needed him most. And when we needed him most, he stepped up." Um, Look, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure out that this guy was incredibly talented beforehand. So I'll let Devin Vassell speak for himself. But look, I think part of the thing what we'll talk about with the Spurs coaching staff, I think will kick themselves. I think I think they'll go back and they'll regret the fact that I think in multiple of those games, I think they did not put the ball in the hands of Dylan Harper more than they should have, especially down the stretch in the fourth quarter. I know he had the play at the end of game five where he was pushing the ball in transition and just left that layup a little short. And then I know he missed the front end of that free throw when they were down by three, but that doesn't matter to me. I mean, to me, he's on the trajectory path. I think next year he's going to be 20 plus. Could be, look, he's to me, he could be a top five scorer in the NBA and all around player, rebounds, assists. He was playing spectacular defense all postseason. Picking up 94 feet, getting into guys on defense. He's a two-way player. It's not like he's just all offense. Um, I think the Spurs are going to be kicking themselves in many ways, and that would be one of them. I think they really should have just let this. They should have unleashed this dude a lot sooner. I think throughout the even going back to game one, Mitch Johnson didn't even have him out there at the end of game one, and that was by choice, and I couldn't believe it at the time. And even though he was out there at the end of a lot of these games, I think moving forward for the Spurs, I think you got to put the ball in that guy's hands at the end of games as much as possible. Regardless, I don't care if you got Wemby or not. I mean, obviously Wemby's an incredible player, and what Wemby's able to do defensively, especially, is mesmerizing in a lot of ways too. But look, they're going to need both of those guys and Stephon Castle as well. I know Stephon Castle did not have his best game tonight, but I have nothing but good things to say about Stephon Castle as well. I think he's on that upward trajectory path as well. I mean, if he's not already, I think all three of those guys are going to be around for a long, long time. Um, Three of the most talented players in the league, regardless of position, and they all happen to be on the same team. So definitely, the Spurs are not going to be going anywhere. We'll see. Obviously, as far as winning a championship, you never know. Look, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but I think just as far as this year, they're going to be kicking themselves. The fact that they were in every game, that they had every game, the way that they blew each of those games in similar but different ways. Um, I know they won game three, but in reality, they really easily could have won every single game that they lost. And so the fact that they didn't win at least one of those games and that we're not getting a game six does feel like a little bit of a disappointment, especially for me, just in a basketball sense, because this would have been what I love to see two more games out of this series. But again, credit to the Knicks. And, again, going back to Wemby too, look, I think again, a lot of people will have a lot to say about him, and the propaganda will be there, and there'll be a big push, in the marketing campaigns and whatnot. That's not my jurisdiction, but I just think that the Spurs are definitely going to be they're going to have to definitely uh, learn from this experience. I think again talking about internal growth. I mean, let's not forget even about a guy like Carter Bryant who didn't really play a whole lot. He's still super young and talented. I think he's got the ability to be a really good defender, a really high quality player. I think he's got a lot of talent. Just needs to really uh, go into the offseason, continue to add to his game, give him more opportunities as well. I think he could be a really good player in the NBA. But I thought it was interesting this Devin Vassell comment that he made about Dylan Harper. I wasn't expecting him to say that, to be honest with you. And normally, whether it's true or not, and you normally don't hear them admit that, but I do think, I look, I'm sure Dylan Harper's going to go into the offseason. He's going to be pissed off and um, motivated. And same thing, Wemby and Steph Castle and all these different guys. Look, they'll be back. They're not going anywhere per se. And going back to Jalen Brunson, though, I want to set that up to talk about De'Aaron Fox real quick. And I know we're going to talk about the Kings, and we'll do all that in due time. Um, De'Aaron Fox to me is really interesting. He was coming out of Kentucky. I liked this game a lot about a decade ago, from a past life. I liked De'Aaron Fox back in the day. I always thought he was a fun player to watch. You always see people say, they have these like anonymous player polls and stuff, and more often than not, most years, they ask, who's the fastest player in the league. Most people say, hey, it's De'Aaron Fox. But um, what's interesting to me about De'Aaron Fox, especially in the last 2 years, I'd say, is I think the way I view De'Aaron Fox has definitely shifted a little bit in the last couple of seasons. I think, look, I think he was clearly not fully healthy. That is true. I don't think he was fully healthy. Now, granted, nobody really is at this time of year. Um, but he definitely wasn't 100%. I know a lot of people will point to game four, but I thought today, he really, or yesterday, depending again how you look at it, I thought he really struggled. Just really was never comfortable. I don't think he was really ever in a rhythm. I think he's a guy to me where, I said it throughout off the record. I'll say it on the record. I think sometimes in sports there's a lot of overreaction sometimes. I know like when the Thunder lost to the Spurs, there's a lot of like, hey, should they trade Shed Holmgren? Fuck no, they shouldn't. Shed Holmgren's gonna be fine. Shed Holmgren on any other team too would have an expanded role, and we'd be talking about Shed Holmgren as a foundational player. But it just so happens that they've got all these other guys that it makes it hard for him to maybe be able to do the things he could do. That if he was on a different team, he'd be able to have the ball in his hands more and be able to showcase his ability to be a really dominant player in the league. And I think Shet will come back motivated. And so look, I think sometimes there's a big overreaction from a lot of people about a lot of different things. And but the one thing I don't think is an overreaction, to be honest with you, I would again two. We always like to say two things and multiple things can be true at once. Was he 100% healthy, De'Aaron Fox? No, but dating back to last year, especially when the Spurs jumped up in a lottery and got the second overall pick, I've been of the opinion dating back to last offseason that the Spurs would be better off with Dylan Harper instead of De'Aaron Fox, and that I thought the decision to give De'Aaron Fox a max was a poor decision. I know San Antonio is one of the best run organizations in sports, and sometimes you're not going to bat 1,000. You're going to make some decisions that maybe you might regret. And I think if you're the Spurs, that's one that you're going to have to look at. And I'm sure. Look, I'm sure De'Aaron Fox is not going anywhere. Uh, I don't think they're going to trade him necessarily, but I think you have to find a way to start Dylan Harper next season. I don't think you could go into next season with him off the bench. And I know it doesn't really matter who starts and who doesn't. I mean, he was playing starters minutes regardless, especially in the finals. You're playing over 30 something minutes a game, but I just think you have to put the ball in that guy's hands as much as possible. And I think with De'Aaron Fox, what's really fascinating me is, again, going back to the Kings part and when he forced his way out of Sacramento to go to San Antonio, I never really liked the things that again, I don't know De'Aaron Fox personally. I have nothing against the guy. Don't hate the guy or anything. But I think some of the things that he kind of talked about on the record and mentioned, even dating back to last year, where, it was, yeah, I wanted to be here in San Antonio and, maybe be able to, you know, uh, take a step back and not be like the focal point and be the guy and just kind of like help uh, I don't know. I think De'Aaron Fox really struggled to find a balance between being the player that he was in Sacramento and I think in many ways he doesn't he I don't know I would find a way to trade the dude if I could, if I was the general manager of the Spurs, which I'm not, and I'm sure the Spurs don't give a fuck what I have to say, but it might not happen immediately. Obviously, easier said than done. And with that contract, I mean, good luck too. They might as well be stuck with him for the next couple of years, regardless. But look, it's not that he's a bad player; he doesn't suck. But um, I just think that he never really was fully comfortable throughout the series, even throughout parts of the season. Yeah, I just feel like he struggled to find ways to assert himself and be the player that they paid him to be and that they traded for. And I thought Dylan Harper in this series was the better player in this series. I think he's going to be a better player in the future. Um, I think everything that De'Aaron Fox can do, Dylan Harper can do better than De'Aaron Fox can. I stand by that. Dating back to last year, I'll stand by that. I think again, I'm sure De'Aaron Fox will come back. He'll get healthier. Again, he's not a terrible player by any means. I'm sure he'll bounce back and have a solid season next year. And it could be back in a year and maybe in the playoffs in a year from now. De'Aaron Fox comes back and kind of gets back to that Mr. Fourth Quarter himself. But I just think this particular series was really tough for him. And going back to the Jalen Brunson thing real quick, Jalen Brunson again, obviously still making a bajillion dollars, but taking $100 million pay cut, whereas Darren Fox, um, going out and trying to squeeze every last cent out, and that's why he wanted to get out of Sacramento was that he wanted a full on max, and that's what San Antonio was going to give him. Um, I just think that's the difference right there. If you ask me who would I rather have between Jalen Brunson and De'Aaron Fox, I think the answer speaks for itself. And um, who would I rather have? Dylan Harper, De'Aaron Fox? I think Dylan Harper. And I know I don't want to contradict myself because I know it's not always about who's better than who and rankings and whatnot. But I just think when you look at that price point of what they're paying him compared to what he was giving them, I think you're gonna have to be asking some questions if you're San Antonio moving forward about how do you want to go about that? Do you start all three of those guards together? Do you continue to bring Dylan Harper off the bench and just play him starters minutes in that modern day Manu Ginobili role, if you will, at least until they find a way to get off of Fox's contract? Who knows? There's a lot of time between now and October and the upcoming season. Um, but I just think that that's a conversation that definitely will be interesting to have and to monitor, regardless of whether they keep Fox or not. I still stand by my point about Dylan Harper. I think he's going to take off next year. I think he'll be a 20, 25 point per game guy in a year or two or three, along with 5, 6, 7 rebounds and 5, 6, 7 assists a night. I mean, he's an incredible player and rock solid defense as well. Um, so look, San Antonio's not going anywhere. Mitch Johnson, their coaching staff's going to learn a lot. We mentioned Chris Gent. maybe not getting as much love in some of these head coaching circles as far as a potential job. I know a guy like Sean Sweeney has been rumored to maybe get one of these open vacancies. Very well could happen, but I think Mitch Johnson and that young coaching staff over there, they'll learn a lot from this experience. The young players will learn a lot. They'll come back motivated, internal growth. Look, they're it might be a blessing for them maybe in many ways that they blew this series, but at the same time, I think regardless of anything, they'll be kicking themselves for it. And I think whatever future success they have, I'm sure they'll look back at this and they'll say that that New York series was what did it for us, and that was the turning point. So if they do have any future success, it will be rooted in whatever they did this year and built throughout the season. But just again, that one last point on the De'Aaron Fox part, I just think that you know, I think what Sacramento did getting off of him was smart and not paying him that money. But I think the mistake that they made, and that will be part of our deep dive, was, and I'm sure it was ownership mandated, to be honest with you, but getting Zach Levine back in that deal, I think was the mistake. I think had they been able to shed that De'Aaron Fox salary, maybe take on a couple of young players or some expiring, so they could have waited. If I was me, what I would have done if I was the Kings, De'Aaron Fox had that thumb injury at the time last year. Um, we mentioned Mike Brown got fired. Doug Christie came in. They went on a little bit of an interim boost. And then, as soon as things started to maybe look a little bit up for them and they started to kind of, play better basketball, as soon as that started to happen was when De'Aaron Fox said, nah, you know what, I want to get traded. So I don't, I don't know. I don't necessarily vibe with that as much, to be honest with you. Just the way that that whole situation was handled. If it was, I get what Sacramento was trying to do, and in the sense of getting off of the salary and not keeping a player that doesn't want to be there, which is a conversation for future episodes regarding different players. Like I do give them credit for not just hanging on to him and holding him hostage. Like if he doesn't want to be there, don't have him. Get out of there. But I think the decision to bring back Zach Levine's salary was the mistake in that for Sacramento. But I don't fault them for making that move. I think Sacramento, whatever future long term success Sacramento is going to have, the blessing for them is going to be that they're if they hadn't have got rid of De'Aaron Fox, they wouldn't have probably been able to bottom out as much this year as they did. Which again, I know they only have the seventh pick, but seventh pick is better than the it's an opportunity for the Kings to get a really, again, going with the NBA draft coming up. I mean, shit, you could get, look at Jalen Brunson and drafted in the 30s in the second round. Uh, listen, you can find value anywhere. So if you're the Kings, whatever future success you're going to have, I think you're looking at it. If you're the Kings, you got rid of De'Aaron Fox. You do have Zach Levine who'll probably pick up his option, but you're thinking maybe if you're Sacramento, you're looking at it where, okay, we're just going to wait until all this payroll comes off the books, not this offseason, but the next offseason. And then that's when they can really start to kind of maybe turn the corner a little bit, slowly but surely, if they do their rebuild right, which again, time will tell. We'll deep dive that. But I think if if you're paying someone max money like that, especially in the modern NBA with the tax aprons and the salary cap, the way that it's structured, you need more than what De'Aaron Fox was giving you, bad ankle or not. And I don't want to keep bashing on the guy. He's a talented player who won, the he's when he's on his game and he's really in rhythm. He's a joy to watch. One of I mentioned earlier, where a lot of people say that he's the fastest player in the league in these anonymous polls. He doesn't necessarily play like it. He does play a little bit more controlled. He likes to just kind of get to his spots and I think the one area, if I'm De'Aaron Fox, and if he does end up staying with the Spurs, which I think he will. I don't think they're not going to overreact to that. But the point that I'm trying to make is that I think De'Aaron Fox tried too much to assimilate into the Spurs instead of trying to add to what they already had. And I think, he could have been a lot more aggressive, I think, in being the type of player that they traded for. And I think there was a lot of hesitancy in his game. There was a lot of passiveness in his game. And then by that same token, I think some of the shots that he did take, I just felt like the rhythm of what he was doing. I don't think he ever really felt comfortable in finding a rhythm within each game, especially in the finals. Whereas a guy like Jalen Brunson, for example, again was getting to his spots. Even if he wasn't shooting the ball at a high clip or whatever, he was doing what he wanted to do. Whereas I think with De'Aaron Fox, I think I don't think he had the same feel for the series in the sense that it felt like when he should have been more aggressive, he wasn't, and when he should have probably moved the ball around a little bit more, was when he decided to kind of take matters into his own hands. And so I think moving forward, assuming he does stay, I think that's an interesting thing to monitor. How do you mesh Fox with Harper with Castle with Wemby? How do you maximize that in a way that everybody is happy, everybody's contributing to winning? I think it's an important conversation. We'll continue to monitor it. I do think those three guys can play together, Harper, Castle, and Fox. I mean, they showed it throughout the year that they can. Obviously, having Wemby helps. When you got a 7-4 guy like that, it helps being able to play three guards like that. I want to give some love to my guy, Champagny. Uh, I mean, it felt like every single time that he was pulling up from three, uh, you know, you take your chances with that dude taking threes, and he was playing some really good defense as well. I mentioned Devin Vassell. He definitely is a great example of a guy who sacrificed touches and a role, and probably on a different team could do more than what he showcased. Keldon Johnson, similarly. Um, so again, I don't want to sound like I'm talking out two sides of my own ass because I do think there's a beauty in sacrifice and for the betterment of the team and not having that expanded role. But it just with Fox specifically, I just felt like in the moments that he could have been aggressive, he wasn't, and vice versa. And I think he'll have to get healthy in the offseason. Obviously, I think it's widely reported. He had a pretty bad high ankle sprain, and those are tough to play on. I think if it was the regular season, he probably wouldn't have even played. So I do give him credit for going out there and competing and being out there. And he's a great player. Again, I'm not saying he sucks, but I just think that the part that I want to make emphasis on is less of De'Aaron Fox, but more of Dylan Harper. Where I just think moving forward, you have to find as many ways as possible to let Dylan Harper be the player that he can be, because I think whatever success that the Spurs have in the future, as much as people will make it about Wemby, it's going to be Dylan Harper, it's going to be Stephon Castle, it's going to be all those guys together. It's not a one man team or anything like that. So something to monitor for sure. Um, but yeah, I think San Antonio, they'll be kicking themselves for a long time. Just in the manner in which they blew a lot of those games, similar and different. They'll learn from this. They'll come back from it. But the West is going to be a bloodbath next year, like we mentioned, and we'll continue to talk about it. And we'll do our deep dive, set the stage for the draft, set the stage for the offseason, all these different things. But yeah, look, OKC's not going anywhere. Denver's not. Denver's got Jokic. Houston's going to be solid. The Lakers. We'll see what happens there. Minnesota. They'll be an interesting team to monitor. See if they maybe make some moves. Um, Dallas, Cooper Flag. Kyrie coming back. We'll see what happens there. They got an upcoming coaching hire coming up as well. You go down the list. We mentioned Utah. I mean, look, all these teams in the West are going to be. Look, it's going to be a bloodbath. So as much as San Antonio is going to be around, look, they're going to have their hands full. So it's going to be a day in day out thing in the Western Conference, and there are a ton of moves that have yet to be happen and so the picture's not even fully complete yet. So just we'll continue to update it. Bet look, the NBA Finals is done. The Knicks are champions, but our basketball coverage is only just beginning. So stay with us throughout these next couple months, and heading into the upcoming season. So that way, by the time that this upcoming season rolls around and we talk about basketball on the daily, you'll be a part of that day-to-day journey that we're trying to build here. We're planting the seeds slowly but surely. Uh, here from here on out, essentially. So that way, by next season, we can really ramp things up in a basketball sense. So the finals have come and gone. The next year, 2026 NBA champions, but basketball coverage in 2026 here at the Unfiltered Report has only just begun. And I can't wait to get all the stars of the Unfiltered Report on here to talk about the finals and the upcoming offseason. Uh, I'm sure Armand's going to take off his shirt and do all kinds of obscene things. And the next time we do one of these recordings together, I know our guy Roy will come in and take his little victory lap for predicting the Knicks a couple of weeks ago. Give him some props and some flowers for that. Hopefully, we'll get his guy Ron on here, and Ron will spread all kinds of propaganda that the world is not ready for. We'll get all the boys back. I know Fadil's going to want to talk about the finals and all these other, Malik and Vince, and we'll go down the list. Can't wait to hear from all these guys, throughout these different sports and all the other fellas out there. I love you all. Uh, I love you, name by name, each episode. I try to do my best to give you all some love, and uh, cheers to the best to come, man. Look, stay with us. Have a good time. But yeah, this has been the Unfiltered Report. My name is Ryan. Uh, Only the beginning of our basketball coverage, but stay tuned. It's gonna be another one of those. I know last night I said we'd come in and put all these in one giant thing. Again, changed my mind. At least for tonight, we're gonna break them up. So this is the NBA basketball conversation. But stay tuned. We're gonna recap day 3 of the World Cup, and then we'll also have a separate episode. We'll recap the College World Series day 2, and we'll throw in some MLB stuff from earlier as well. So stay tuned for all of it. Got lots on the docket, lots more to come. Stay safe out there.